Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on a Civil War Research Trail. Today's story begins with an email from Robert Montez, a subscriber who I met in person last year at the Ohio Civil War Show in Mansfield, Ohio. Robert is a generous spirit and an ardent supporter of Military Images Magazine, and I am grateful for his interest in history and his support of what we do. Robert's email introduced me to the Reverend Canon Chad Slater of the Episcopal Diocese of West Virginia. His work includes preserving the historic Morgan Chapel, pictured here, and the adjacent cemetery. It's a beautiful church, brick, Greek revival. It was erected in the community of Bunker Hill in 1851 in what was then Virginia. Bunker Hill was settled by colonial Europeans in 1726. They built the first church there in the year 1740. Bunker Hill has seen its share of war as much as any place in colonial times in America, including the French and Indian War and the Revolution. When Civil War came to the United States, Bunker Hill's citizenry, largely of Southern sympathies and holders of enslaved people, felt the sting of war. One of the earliest recorded actions is a skirmish in July of 1861, one of many that occurred in and about the area, which is strategically located in Berkeley County, West Virginia, just a few miles from the Virginia border. Of course, during the early part of the war, West Virginia was not yet a state. If you look at the area on a map, you'll see that Bunker Hill is situated between Martinsburg, West Virginia, and Winchester, Virginia, a bit closer to Martinsburg, a very volatile area. Morgan Chapel was known as Christ Church during the war, and it bore witness to the violence directly. It has the scars to prove it in the form of graffiti in words and pictures. Yesterday, I drove to Morgan Chapel with my wife Ann to meet Reverend Slater, a young man who prefers to be called Chad. Within moments, I felt his passion for history, his faith, and his desire to remember what happened at Morgan Chapel more than 160 years ago. Chad has ambitions to return the church to an active center of worship where congregants and others can meet and consider the horrors of a war in a place where it actually happened to prevent such tragedies from ever visiting our soil again. As I listened to Chad speak, a simple thought ran through my mind. Here's a man on a mission, a worthy mission. Robert, who had sent me the email, couldn't be with us as his daughter had recently given birth to a granddaughter, and he was understandably with his family. Another great guy, however, was with us, John Banks, who many of you students of the Civil War know for his popular blog, podcast, and writings in the Civil War Monitor. Chad gave us a tour. I was stunned by the volume, the variety, and the content of the words and images all over the walls. Though they're hard to see because there's a restoration and it's in its earliest stages, the impact is overwhelming. At least it was to me. I want to share some of what I saw. On the other side of the images I'm going to share comes a request for your help. So let's get started. This is an image of what appears to be a horse, a primitive drawing with the nose, and you can see the mane coming off of the neck, running down the neck of the horse. And I should say, I'm starting out with the drawings, and then we'll get into inscriptions and then autographs as we move down. So this is the first image, a horse. This next image is rather interesting. It appears to be a man, and by the, at least on the left, a man with a mustache. He has what looks to be perhaps a kepi or some sort of cap, some sort of a military cap. He is wearing also what may be a frock coat. You can see the tail of that coat coming out. Could also be some sort of a haversack. His hands are willy-nilly in front of him. He's clearly on the run. And the individual behind him, it looks to me like he is wearing horns and a devil's cape. Is this Satan who is chasing a soldier away from what? Or trying to capture a soldier? Is it the Union devil trying to capture the Confederates? Is it the Confederate devil trying to capture Union soldiers? I don't know. It's a bit of a mystery at this time. Here's the next image. You can see the writing, large writing over it that says Boston. But what caught my attention is the soldier and this incredibly, incredibly long beard. Somebody was having fun. The beard just goes on, and you can see it ends where there's some plaster or over painting on the wall, which I think is part of the restoration in progress as the paint is being removed. I'm assuming that beard just goes on and on and on. And take a look at the cap. It's a pretty faithful reproduction of a very early war McDowell style cap. Very interesting. Now, here's an image. I'm not quite sure what the history is. I'm not quite sure what the relationship of it is to the Civil War in the context, but it simply says, as you can read, our bore. There might be some backstory there. I don't know. One more image to show you. This is a soldier. Again, you can see the cap. The kepi is pretty well defined. This gentleman, I don't know if he's an officer, but you can see his mustache pointing out. You can see his long chin beard pointing out. I don't really see any evidence of arms, but look at his legs. They're sort of stumpy, and then there's little tiny legs, sort of withered legs coming down. I've seen this type of drawing in other primitive Civil War, done by Civil War soldiers, a very primitive look. I'm not quite sure what it's all about, but it certainly appears to be a portrait of a soldier. Now I want to take you into some inscriptions. And here's the first one. Take a close look. I'll read the transcription to you. The reading is like this: Corporal R.J. Hogue, Company M, 8th OVI. Whoever shall read this will please remember me in their prayers and excuse me for writing this in the house of God, for I should not have written on the walls. I hope, if not of being marked up before the 27th, 1864. This is an admission and an apology, and it also speaks to the idea that, well, everybody else wrote on the walls, so I guess I can too. Hogue, that's R.J. Hogue, started the war in September of 1861 as a 21-year-old private in Company K of the 44th Ohio Infantry. Upon the expiration of the regiment's enlistment, he and other members of the regiment reorganized as the Buckeye State's 8th Cavalry, advancing to corporal. When you see the 8th OVI, that of course is, or pardon me, OVC, that's the state's the Ohio Volunteer Cavalry. So as I mentioned, he rose to the rank of corporal. And one thing I want to draw upon here is when he wrote this in 1864, recalling his note that there was already writing on the wall, tells me that it had been defaced for some time after that. In fact, one of the writings I found had the date of 1862 on it. So at least for 2 or more years before that, there was writing on the wall. Now, here's the antithesis of that. A simple statement. Notice the hand pointing, a very classic mid-19th century engraving that you see to bring attention to a notice. And this one says it like it is. He who desecrates a church wall is not wanting to be called a man. There it is, plain and simple. Speaking of plain and simple, here's another one. It says, as you can read, death to rebels. Notice the cannon, the drawing of a cannon. Notice that it's perched upon what appears to be bricks. My thinking is that whoever wrote this was accustomed to seeing the larger guns, and this looks like a large tube of a cannon. The way, and it's also nicely drawn. It's well articulated. You can see the one end is larger and it tapers down towards the mouth. And the fact that it is sitting on some type of bricks suggests that it was part of a fortress. Perhaps this individual, this Union soldier, had come out of the defenses of Washington or some other place where that's what they were accustomed to seeing. Perhaps a clue to his identity. Let's move to the next image. This is another inscription. It says, "Look out, Johnny Reb, for we are coming to get you. And by the help of God, we are bound to lick you traitors." Below that is a note in what I think is another hand. It says, "You did it at Lynchburg and Winchester." More research to be done there. Here's another death to traitors, but this one has a bit more of a local connection. Death to all rebels in the Shenandoah Valley. Of course, the Shenandoah Valley is moving due south from where Bunker Hill is. And so a lot of the men, certainly in 1862, during Stonewall Jackson's historic Valley campaign, and then later on in 1864, where Sheridan and his Union cavalry had the upper hand, Shenandoah Valley certainly scenes to war. And so, not surprising that many of the soldiers would make references or at least think about the valley. Now, here's another one which has a sort of a double meaning to it. This one says, "Down with treason and traitors and copperheads." Now, this meaning could refer to Confederates who seceded from the United States and, of course, formed the Confederacy. It is also referring to that faction of the Democratic Party in the North, the Copperheads, who were active, particularly active in Ohio, where a number of the Union infantrymen and cavalrymen who wrote on the walls were from. Now, I've got another one to share with you, which sort of maybe is a bookend to all the inscriptions I just read. Someone taking the high ground. "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." Now, I want to get into one more description, one more inscription with you to give you a flavor of a bit of just a local observation. A moment in time, really, is more accurate. It simply says, "The 91st Ohio got dinner on the opposite of the creek here, July 19th, 1864. Just a moment in time, capturing a moment in time. Now, we'll round this out with a couple of IDs. First one is 19-year-old Sebastian A. Fithian, who enlisted in the 155th Ohio Infantry. That was in May 1864. At that time, the valley was on the verge of being invaded by the Union. Here's one for you. John J. Reeder. He joined the 8th Ohio Cavalry as a private in Company L at age 23. He survived the war and died in 1905. And lastly, George T. Morse was a 21-year-old courier when he enlisted in July of 1861 as a private in Company G of the 13th Massachusetts Infantry. So there you have it. A good sense of what you'll find inside the church, a sampling of drawings and inscriptions and autographs by Union soldiers, what they left on the walls of this church. Now, a call for your help. If you are a generous soul and able to help financially or by volunteering your time, please contact Chad As I mentioned at the top of this video, he's got a lot of ambitions and he needs help. I've left his email in the description. Also, I mentioned or shared examples of 3 of the men who autographed the walls and a 4th who left an inscription. Well, there's 22 Union soldiers and 1 Confederate whose names you'll find. That's 23 Union and Confederate soldiers altogether that left their names on the walls. They served in infantry and cavalry regiments from some of what you heard: Massachusetts, Ohio, plus Maryland, New York, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. I've also put their names in the description, and I need your help. If you are a genealogist, if you are a researcher, if you are a photo collector, a curator, or just have an interest, shouldn't say just, if you have an interest in the Civil War, I'm searching for photographs, either wartime or post-war images of these individuals. Armed with a wartime or a post-war photograph, that will enable me to do an article for Military Images magazine. And I so much want to do it. So I hope that you all can help me and I can list your support. And also remember, helping out Chad as much as you can. There's more to come on this humble and historic place. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.